How we see our sexuality, I believe, really is affected by the collective unconscious, but when we can detach from that and we can go within to identify what our sexuality means to ourselves, we have a chance to renew it, so to speak.
Welcome to Women We Should Know with international speaker, mindset reset mentor, author, and your host, Lesley Michaels. With audacious honesty and candor, the Women We Should Know podcast presents the wisdom and life-empowering insights of women who are the embodiments of innovation and social evolution. Please join Lesley as she shares potent conversations that will inspire your personal and professional evolutions.
It is a delight to be back with all of you today, and as is our tradition here at Women We Should Know, to bring to you the voice, the audacity, the innovation of yet another woman whose name you might not know, but whose interest and whose actions in the way that she is bringing a new way of seeing ourselves to the world. She is someone that you will want to know. Kristy LaMariana, I trip on that, but that's okay. Received her Master's of Science in Art Psychotherapy from the Eastern Virginia Medical School. And after graduating, she moved to New York and spent time cultivating her medicine bag. Isn't that a great sentence? A great way to look at what we're doing. She was also honored to study life after life with Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience. Then, take a little bit of a shift. It might seem like a big shift, but it's just a little shift. She became a firewalk instructor, which is all about settling into ourselves. She led corporate firewalks as well as private. Then Kristy had 4 sons over a 9-year span. That in and of itself deserves a trophy. As her boys got older, she began to work in the family motorcycle dealership, putting on fashion shows and building community. Is there anything that she hasn't done? She plans to publish the fast food franchise in cookbook form. And in Kristy's kitchen, food is a source of nourishment, community, creative magic, healing, and love. And then after that, and I'm skipping a whole bunch of pieces, ladies, I'm skipping a whole bunch of pieces. These are just the big highlights of what she's done. She dove into her inspired entrepreneurial self and wrote a book focused on normalizing and redefining sexuality as a part of a holistic, healthy lifestyle. We'll be talking about that a great deal today. And Kristy's comfortable working with anyone, men, women, young people, but her current work makes her best choice for women who are healing their sexuality. And that's been a necessary and unspoken of topic for a very long time. Consequently, I am delighted and honored to welcome her to join us. Kristy LaMariana. Good morning, Kristy.
Good morning, Lesley. Thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. I am thrilled that you agreed to come on the show. Well, there is a whole lot to talk about, and certainly women's sexuality is a great big topic. But before we go there, what I would like to invite you to do is to share something that is not in your bio that you would like our listeners to know about you.
I believe anything is possible. I believe that there is an abundance of love on this earth and throughout the universe that can heal anything and everything when we tap into it.
And how do you access and apply that in your life?
I would say that that's through my daily meditation practice. Every morning when I wake up, before I get out of bed, I meditate for 20 minutes and be sure that I kind of tune my radio dial into the station that I want to be connected to. And so that's how I do that.
I love that as a practice. I have my own morning rituals. There's a lot to be said for choosing where we want to go in our day before we ever get out from under the sheets.
Yes.
Now, speaking of believing that there's an abundance of everything in the world, you must have developed this very long ago. I love the story of you selling Girl Scout cookies to Ethel Kennedy. Can you tell our audience about this?
Sure. I grew up in Northern Virginia, in McLean, Virginia, about a mile from the CIA in Langley Oaks. And so we lived across Georgetown Pike from Ethel Kennedy. And I was a Girl Scout, and it was that time of year. It was cookie sale time. So I told my mom I wanted to go door to door and do some cookie sales. And she said, okay, well, you need to stay in the neighborhood. Do not cross Georgetown Pike. I knew that I wanted to go to Ethel's. That was kind of my motive the entire time. So I went ahead and crossed Georgetown Pike, walked over there in my little green uniform. And when I arrived, they had these huge gates with 12 dogs. And it would, be two teeny dogs, and they were in pairs all the way up to Great Danes. So it was like Chihuahuas all the way to Great Danes. And a voice came on the loudspeaker, can we help you? And the gate opened when I told them why I was there, and they invited me in. And I had a little tour of their home, which was very White House-esque, if you will. Each room had its own theme, from wallpaper, crown molding, wallpaper, everything matched. Everything was beautiful. And then I was invited into their kitchen for cookies and milk, and they proceeded to order 200 boxes of Girl Scout cookies. So when I went home, I said, Mom, you really can't be mad at me because look at the order I got. So that's my fun Girl Scout cookie story. And then I have another interesting being raised in Northern Virginia story. The Speaker of the House at the time was Jim Wright. I don't know if you remember him. When I was a senior in high school, and so when I had to do my senior government paper, my parents were really good friends with Jim and Betty. So I got to go right across the street and have this incredible interview, which pretty much educated the class in ways we weren't prepared to be gifted with. So that was amazing. And my parents remained good friends with Jim and Betty until he passed some time ago.
That's a lovely story. And the thing I really adore about both of those stories is it gives our listeners great insight to who you are. Your fearless audacity, your sense of being equal to whoever else lives on the planet. And I think that that's something women are far too short of. What would you say to that?
I absolutely agree. There's so much comparing that goes on between women and all people, I think. And I guess I kind of have always had that feeling like if that person can do it, I can do it, and I want everybody to feel that about themselves. If I can do it, you can do it. If you can do it, I can do it. We're all here to lift each other up and to remind each other that our dreams really can become reality if we believe in ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a really nice segue into women and our sexuality, because the way in which we don't believe in ourselves and the way in which we do compete, it's my belief that this is a key element in what is restricting us in the way we experience ourselves, the way we experience our own sexuality, the way we do share it or don't share it. But then you're the one who went to med school. So enlighten me, if you will. Where am I seeing this incorrectly?
How we see our sexuality, I believe, really is affected by the collective unconscious. But when we can detach from that and we can go within to identify what our sexuality means to ourselves, when we separate from all of these global, generational, religious ideologies that are surrounding our sexuality, we have a chance to renew it, so to speak. We have a chance to become reacquainted with what works for us and what we intrinsically we may know, but we may be disconnected from. For men, sexuality can be very empowering and always has been, alluring, sort of mystifying, hypnotic. As women, I believe that we are just now touching the surface of our power and our connection to our sexuality. And a very important way that we can do that is through self-pleasure, is through taking that back and having a healthy sexual relationship with ourselves. And then that bleeds out into our relationships with others, our intimate relationships with others, and how we share that with our young ones, and how we educate our young ones. You know, I like to say that we're living through a pandemic, but we're also living through a porndemic. And it's a really important time to give young people alternatives to pornography and new ways to be acquainted with their own bodies by using their imagination and appreciating the sensuality of themselves, not having to focus all of that outward, but take it inward.
So for all of our parents of pubescent, pre or post, but pubescent kids who are listening today, what are some practical ways that are respectful and that do build self-esteem, that help the kids of today come to know themselves in a way that they have a new level of appreciation, particularly females, because it's been experienced as a negative for males and females, but females have experienced more of the negative, I think.
So I think some awareness around the fact that we have ultrasounds that show that when a fetus is in utero, they actually self-soothe, and you can track this on heart monitors with fetuses. And so they self-soothe by touching their genitals. And so I think education around normalization of self-pleasure is a very big step to help parents to feel comfortable with talking with their children, with making this an open conversation, a healthy part of their lives. It's not that we're encouraging early sexual behavior, but we're acknowledging that it's rising even faster now than ever. You know, I know young girls who get their periods at 10 years old. So that means that these hormones are pumping through their body and they're ready to be sexual creatures. They're not emotionally ready to connect with a partner, but to teach them about the sacredness of their own body and that inherent health benefits associated with orgasm. To not make it something that's so taboo that we as parents are uncomfortable talking with our kids about. It's happening whether we want to acknowledge it or not. Our kids are most likely touching themselves and quite possibly using pornography. And so I think it's really important that we have early intervention through education to give people other alternatives. Like, one of my goals is to create guided visual imageries for young people that sort of acquaint them with their bodies, so that when they're in that mode of self-pleasuring, they can think of themselves instead of fantasizing about others. Take that into something really beautiful and sensual, and realize that your body is a temple, and this experience that your body can have can help you to heal when you understand the power of it.
I like that idea of creating a natural way for young people, kids, to understand that self-soothing is about them. It's not about whatever this pornographic material is that's out there, or maybe they're not even using pornography in a traditional sense. Maybe it's the poster of their favorite actor or their favorite singer. But to come into that space of knowing that they are doing this for themselves. And it strikes me that as more of us, adults, kids, are able to have that experience for ourselves, that there is a lot that goes on in the brain in terms of telling us about our value, heightening our sense of personal value.
Yes, I believe that there is a lot that goes on in the brain. And we're redefining that sense of personal value and the relationship with self. And so we call it self-pleasure, but we can really take that self hyphen and put anything we want: self-esteem, self-confidence, self-compassion, self-love, self-care. There's so much that we can do to cultivate the relationship with self. and not in a narcissistic way, but in a really healthy way. You know, we can't really take care of others until we've taken care of ourselves. And the more comfortable we are in ourselves, the easier it is to tap into a true, strong sense of our own self-esteem. Oftentimes, youngsters are looking for that outside of themselves. The book that I wrote was an interview-based book, and as I interviewed all these women from different walks of life, I learned their stories of their adolescence, of maybe them losing their virginity, and how many of them did it prior to being ready, really seeking approval outside of themselves. So if I do this, maybe I'll be loved. If I do this, you know, then maybe I'll feel better about myself. Maybe I'll feel prettier. Maybe I'll feel smarter. Maybe I'll feel more deserving. And so, like you said, we bring this back to the self-awareness and what this does for ourselves to improve us as individuals within ourselves.
Absolutely. In an earlier conversation, something I found particularly fascinating that you learned as you were doing your interviews and speaking with different people was how many of our young females are having sex with a partner. They are not mentally ready. They are not emotionally ready, but they are having sex with a partner because of the extreme taboo that they have been taught in the home and in the church around touching themselves. Yes.
So some of these interviewees were taught that it's a sin, that it's not good for them. It's basically a spiritually unhealthy practice to self-soothe. So this is so deeply entrenched in their thought process that they're not having any sexual pleasure unless it's with a partner. And the specific people that I'm thinking of in this interview were with male partners. And so it was very much reserved for them to give them that pleasure. It was not something that they did for or with themselves. And to take that a step further, some of these interviewees had never touched themselves, have never looked at themselves in the mirror. And so they're very disconnected from their bodies and from their sexuality because they've been taught that it's really not something that a proper lady does.
Right. I remember back in my teens when I stuck out my thumb and hitchhiked to the East Coast to weave my way into the center of the women's movement. Part of what I learned out there through different groups and different conversations and different environments in which I found myself, where it was revelatory that we were taking mirrors collectively as a group and discovering ourselves, actually discovering ourselves. And I recall having been raised by a very proper British mother, how astonishing that was to me. And now my astonishment is that tradition is of teaching young women how all of those terrible words it is to self-soothe or look at oneself is still carrying on. That was in the early 1970s.
That's incredible. What a great experience that you got to be a part of.
And I'm grateful for it. But still, to my point, the horror that 1970, fast forward to 2021, and that tradition of teaching women, teaching young girls, that it is nasty or it is wrong or it is a sin to know themselves is still self-perpetuating.
It is, and I think that women like us, though, we are right here to help change that. And as we educate other women, I think that this movement is going to then slowly penetrate, so to speak, into the consciousness of males, and to help them to realize that while things have been a lot easier for them and we've sort of identified self-pleasure as a necessity for the male, I think they're going to begin to recognize the collective unconscious that surrounds their sexual behavior, their sort of disconnection from the sacredness of their bodies. I'm going through an interesting time. Our friend and mentor Jane has kind of displayed dissuaded me from continuing. I have some friends that have really encouraged me to be on dating sites. You know, I'm single, and it's really interesting being single for the first time since I was 21, and now I'm 51, going on 52, to see the different experiences and behaviors that men are practicing in the world. And something that I experienced in the last week was really kind of mind-boggling to me. When you have a person who's successful and beautiful and healthy, and the only way they can relate is through their sexuality. And I believe that our sexuality is one way to relate, but through our mind and our ability to communicate the deepest parts of our sensuality that we can do while keeping our clothing on, and do it in sort of a poetic way, is lost on so many men, on what maybe the expectation is for them. And I am excited to one day help them to recover the sacredness of their bodies, and something that's really a gift to themselves. And I just feel like men have been exploited as much as women, and we feel so exploited by them, and they keep perpetuating the cycle that they haven't even really had a chance to look at the wounds within them that make them continue the perpetuation of something like this.
That's an interesting and much deeper assessment, observation than what I've heard in the past, but it makes perfect sense. If even when you're in high school, it is assumed that boys must have sex. There's this assumption that they must, as if it is a compulsion instead of a choice.
Mm-hmm.
But girls, if they do it, they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
They're terrible. They are all those names that all the girls don't want to be called. And I remember even back in school thinking, okay, boys need to, girls shouldn't. There seems to be a disconnect in the training here.
Absolutely. Some of the women that I interviewed who grew up with older brothers, or grew up with friends that had older brothers, said, you know, it was absolutely expected. And as a matter of fact, it was a necessity for males. But for females, it wasn't ladylike. It wasn't something that it was looked down upon. It wasn't respected. And so girls inherently had shame around their self-pleasure, and they carried that into their adult lives, because that's what's deep in the unconscious, is this isn't okay. It's not a good thing for a young lady to participate in, and definitely not to talk about if she was doing it. I mean, keep that secret.
Exactly. So here we have humans who are in organic mechanisms. If we want to get very clinical about the bodies, they are naturally organic mechanisms. And every organic mechanism has its own experience of evolution. Part of ours is puberty, when those hormones start to move and we want to experience more physicality. If they experience physicality with boys, there are all those shameful, horrible names that young girls get called, and very often more so by the other girls than by the boys, because we do tend to persecute each other as females. But then they're not allowed to self-soothe, because it's not ever considered self-soothing. It's considered all of those other negatives, a sin. What do you share with women? How do you share with women? And what do you encourage? What steps do you encourage them to take in terms of becoming more familiar with themselves? And I, for one, really appreciate shifting it from all of the words that are not negative in and of themselves, but have been given negative connotations, to a statement of self-soothing.
So that's an interesting question. What steps would we take? I guess the first step would be to recognize, to observe, to accept our desire. I just want to tie this back into a story that happened a couple of summers ago. I was out to dinner with a group of women at our beautiful Los Poblanos, and talking about my work, my vision, my mission. And one of the women, this beautiful woman who has been raised Christian and is just a woman of faith and a mother to 3 beautiful children, had just began to cry at the table and said, you know what I was taught? I was taught that I could turn these desires off, and I had to turn them off until I was married. And when I tried to turn them off in my brain and they wouldn't turn off in my body, I thought there was something wrong. I couldn't figure out why I was doing what I was told to do, but my body still wanted me to seek sex, to seek pleasure, to seek the attention of the boys. And she said, I wish that I was taught differently. And thank you for coming out like this, because you're going to help us to help our daughters and our sons. So I think the first step is creating awareness around the hormonal urge, that we cannot repress, no matter how much we want to repress it. And if we're going to repress it in terms of abstinence with a partner, then we give the alternative. We say, okay, the desire is there, acknowledge that the desire is there, and then let's step into a healthy relationship with your body. I think a lot of it starts with self-acceptance of the body. So many of us have body image issues or body dysmorphic disorder, or issues around loving the self. So there's a book called Think Yourself Thin. I remember reading this book in the 90s, and it talked about the only way that you're going to change your body and your relationship to your body is to love it the way it is right now. So I think a first step for a lot of women is going to be to accept their bodies before that they can go deep into their self-pleasure. They're going to need to accept their bodies. So the first step would be acknowledging that we have this desire. The second step would be acknowledging the need to accept our bodies and to love our bodies just the way they are. And the third step for women who are completely out of touch, when I interviewed different women, some of them had never used tampons because they have never touched themselves. They've never looked at themselves. They're so disconnected. So creating a safe space for them to begin to explore themselves. And then maybe to think about different ways. Some people, they want to use we call them sexual aids in my work. They want to use aids, which we call vibrators, or they just want to be natural and use their hands. Other women enjoy water. There are many ways. So it's figuring out what works for you, and then how you want to integrate that into your life. Is this something that you would like to do daily as a part of your daily health routine, like your meditation or your yoga practice or your stretching or brushing your teeth? Do you want this to be a part of your daily life and to start to see how much better you feel when it is? Because it opens up our creative center. It connects us to others. It relieves stress. It helps us to sleep better. It does so many wonderful things for us from head to toe. When we can identify the desire, and when we have a desire strong enough, we're going to find a path to get there and what works for us.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you about, in the process of developing a new relationship with oneself, it would seem to me that it would be important to not always have orgasm as the goal, but to actually have self-soothing, self-loving, self-nurturing as the goal. Or am I missing something?
You're spot on, Lesley. We know that pleasure equals health. We're looking for holistic health here, body, mind, soul health, a balanced human being. And so many issues happen when you're in a partnership, when their goal is orgasm. It can even be there for the self within an individual relationship. If you go into your self-pleasure time thinking that the orgasm is the goal, and maybe your mind is in the way of reaching that, just being in the moment of that pleasure can bring you so much health. Just being in the moment. And so I like to say to couples, when there's so much pressure in the bedroom about reaching that goal of orgasm, and the pressure is then put on your partner, we can relieve that pressure from your intimacy, from your intimate romantic relationship, by making it about being in the moment, by making it about that pleasure, because we know that pleasure equals health.
Well, that just makes sense to me, because if you are in a relationship, a pleasure moment relationship with yourself, or a pleasure moment relationship with a partner. It would strike me that if orgasm is the only goal, what gets left out of the equation is the experience of loving.
Yes.
And the experience of sharing nurturance and sharing love and sharing true intimacy. It's just go in, get it done, get it over with.
And that's what it is for so many people. And when we think about different spiritual practices, specifically yogic practices, there are many teachings that encourage students, if you will, to not have orgasm, because there's a belief that there is a losing of the life force energy. And this is in my book, I talk about the history of many different religions and their belief around masturbation. And most of it is really, the writings are really centered around how it depletes the energy of the male, how it takes the life force away from the male. There's not even much talk about self-pleasure for women in history, in religious history. It's really all about men. So we have to be sensitive to that some people really do believe that holding that energy back, moving it up the spine, you know, in yoga, we talk about the kundalini rising, the energy rising up the spine from the base of the spine all the way to the top of the head, and then connecting us with the heavens. When we think about that and we honor that, we realize that it's almost like our relationship with our sexuality is like our relationship with food. It changes throughout our lives. We have different times that we eat different things. We eat different times of day. We eat different amounts. Our weights change. It's the same thing with our sexual pleasure. That, you know, as my book is called Awakening. And as I have kind of gone through my own awakening, because, you know, we all teach what we need to learn. As I've gone through my own awakening, you know, my experiences with myself and through that process have been different over the last few years. You know, sometimes the goal is the orgasm. Sometimes it's bringing that orgasmic energy right up into my heart and allowing it to transform into an unconditional love that's so pure that translates into my mothering, into my working, into my relationships with my girlfriends, into my communication with my parents. It's what we choose to do with that energy in the moment. So I think having consciousness around what it means to each of us at different times is really helpful, because it's not going to be the same 24/7, 7 days a week, 12 months a year. It's going to ebb and flow.
Exactly. And speaking of experiencing ourselves differently in different periods, I know it's not been that long since you went through a sudden and surprising dissolution of a 30-year marriage. And that had to play in very deeply to the way that you understood your relationship with yourself, and therein the way you help women understand their self-relationships.
Absolutely. I call him my husband we met in 1990, and he left 2 years ago. And the nature of the end of our relationship was very much around sexual wounds, generational sexual wounds, really. But they were manifested through cheating, long time cheating through my marriage. And so that betrayal trauma was huge. I had to get through that before I could really start to heal the way that impacted my own sexuality. Finally, learning the truth, something, you know, kind of intuiting this my entire adult life, that something just wasn't spot on, but I didn't really know, because every time I would address my intuition, you know, he would dismiss it. There was a healing, not only from the betrayal, but then healing from recognizing that my intuition was spot on, and learning how to really trust and listen to myself, even when somebody's telling me that I'm not spot on. And then that did sink into, or sort of shift into, healing my own sexuality. And so my work is really, it's about helping others to heal their sexuality, but I've had to do it myself first. And I'm a work in progress, like all of us. I think that I'm working towards where I want to be. but a lot of the shift in consciousness around sexuality it's a daily practice to sort of redefine what it is that I want and what is sacred and meaningful to me and what I want to teach my children.
Absolutely. We are all a work in progress, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. And the minute we get to one place of comfort, then we find another place that we get to focus on. And it can be exciting or it can be grueling depending on how we want to address it.
It's like when you said that, it reminds me of polishing. We're continuing to polish ourselves, and then we polish over here and we look and go, oh, we could do a little bit more over here, and like the painting is never finished.
Exactly. As you were speaking about moving through your divorce and your husband and all of the different elements, what came to mind was other women who are divorced, or women who were with the same partner for 30, 40, 50 years, and suddenly they find themselves completely alone because they are widows. And sex is not addressed to the degree that I could imagine them having any sense of where is the next step to go with myself.
During my interviews, it's funny, I didn't even know what this was. I was a hospice chaplain and bereavement counselor, and working in this field of healing women's sexuality. And I learned a term called sexual bereavement. And sexual bereavement is something that is actually much more commonplace than we talk about, because people are a little bit embarrassed about it. But a lot of times what happens for a grieving widow, I've only spoken to women, but I would assume that this is across the board, gender-wise. It probably happens with men too. That void after being with somebody, even if they're 80 and their spouse had been, had erectile dysfunction for years, there's still a void from the touch, the loss of the touch and that intimacy. What happens for some of these people is they start to sort of revert to behaviors of their youth, and they start to seize sexual opportunities, maybe one night stands, maybe lots of different boyfriends. And they'll tell you, I was trying to fill a void. I was trying to fill that hole in my soul. I felt so empty after he died that I just started to date and to have sex with people. And this is a thing. It's called sexual bereavement. So for a lot of women and possibly men, I don't know, I haven't talked to them about it, this is a thing. Now, for those that have been, I talk to a lot of women who say, oh my gosh, I'm so disconnected from that. There's probably cobwebs down there. We would really need to dust that out for me to even consider, reacquainting oneself with that part of their body. I think at that age is so important, because we sometimes forget that they're sexual creatures still, even in later stages of life. And I think there are ways to reawaken that after the loss of a spouse. There are ways to reawaken that so that they're not seeking it outside of themselves, so that they can really take care of themselves and not be forgotten. And remember that just because people have gone through menopause doesn't mean that they don't have sexual drive or desire for, intimacy with self or others.
Absolutely. I've never heard of sexual bereavement. That is fascinating. And no doubt we have some woman out in the audience who is really grateful to you right now for having spoken of that.
And normalizing it and making it okay.
Making it okay. I know a lot of women, of course, being the age I am, I speak to a lot of women who are friends and associates who are postmenopausal. It's just the natural way of life. And I've heard again and again and again, women speak of how there was a resurgence. Postmenopausal, there was actually a resurgence of that, shall we call it, aching desire to have sex that they hadn't experienced since puberty. What have you found around that?
Well, I think that that's actually very true. And for me personally, I'm postmenopausal now, and I feel just as excited about an intimate relationship with myself and someone else when the time is right, the same as I did then. It's interesting because it's like a muscle. The more you use it, the more it wants to be used. So the more that we exercise, the better we feel. The more we do yoga, the better we feel. It's the same thing. The more we self-pleasure, the more we want it because we feel better. So I do think that that's true for anyone of all ages, and to be this age and connect back to those feelings, it's so invigorating, and it's like an infusion of youth.
I could continue to speak with you on this topic for a very long time, but as we're wrapping up, what I would love for you to do, Kristy, is to give our women in our audience two things, two very simple, very clear, very applicable things that they can do to start developing a new relationship with themselves. Maybe they're not ready to go to the sensual level, but where can they start? What is something rock solid that they can do?
So stand in front of your mirror and take your clothes off and look at your body. Maybe light some candles and turn on some beautiful music. Smell your favorite oils and just look at yourself and just be grateful for your body, for every inch of your body, for the hair on your head, for all of the beautiful collagen in your face, for the skin, for your breasts, for your belly, for everything. So just stand in the mirror and appreciate yourself. Love yourself. That's the first thing to do. And the second
Beautiful.
thing to do, I think, would be to write yourself a love letter. Write yourself a love letter that you'd like to receive. A love letter that tells you all of the wonderful things about yourself, all the things that you love about yourself. Write yourself a love letter.
I like that. I may just do that just because it sounds wonderful. Thank you, Kristy, for coming on with us today. And for all of you listening, be sure and go to the website. You will find the program notes with some of Kristy's great nuggets. You will find information on her bio. You will find information on her book. You will find her website. You will find the tools that she is developing for helping women with their sexuality. It will all be right there, easy access on the website for you. I am so pleased to have been with you today and to have had the opportunity to bring this amazing woman to the microphone. I hope that you did receive some nuggets that will benefit your life, that will inspire your inner audacity, your inner creativity, and your inner sensual love for yourself. Remember, you are smarter and wiser than you know, and nothing is beyond you.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. We hope you received inspiration for expanding your own social innovation and influence. Help us inspire others by sharing this episode and leaving your comments over at lesliemichaels.com/podcast. For more tips, insights, and support in creating a fully audacious, professional, and personal lifestyle you love, visit our Women We Should Know community on Facebook.